Hi, everybody. Welcome to Third Space Live. This is your June edition of the show, and this month we are focusing on prioritizing joy and the science of joy. And we have an awesome guest on the show today. Her name is Trina Kushnerik, and she is coming to us from Kelowna as well. She has a Bachelor of Arts and Honors in Psych. And she's starting her Master's of Social Work at UBCO this fall. And she's an expert in positive psychology and joy. And we're just really happy to have you here today, Trina. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Megan.
I know that you've got a podcast called the Happycast, and you also have created a research-based happiness calendar, which is really cool. And maybe we can hear a little bit about that later in the show. But I'm really interested to hear a little bit about what sparked your interest in positive psychology and why you feel it's an important area of psychology.
So I first heard about positive psychology in my intro to psych class in my freshman year of university. And I thought it was pretty interesting, but I didn't think too much of it at first. But then in my third year, when I started getting involved in research, I was looking to do some summer research and write my honors thesis. I really thought positive psychology would be so interesting because if you're spending all this time studying something, why not study something positive? Because even the most positive, happy person out there can apply positive psychology to their life. And what I thought was cool was positive psychology is all about helping us flourish and thrive. And even if we somehow removed all our negative emotions, which is impossible and not the goal of positive psychology at all, but even if we could, we wouldn't necessarily be happy. We'd be in a neutral state. So positive psychology, I thought it was really cool because it's all about helping us unlock our human potential and just be the best version of ourselves that we can be.
Oh, that's so interesting. I even just look at your background, that where you're sitting today with like the bright colors and the flowers and the smile on your face, like everything about you just says like happiness and positivity. Yeah. So that's awesome. And then you look at my background and I'm in an office, but that's okay. So another thing that we've learned about you is that you have a deep appreciation for research and research-based sharing. And that's something that we have in common because at the charity, we believe in research-based, everything that we do is research-based as well. So why do you believe that we should emphasize the science behind the suggestions when we're suggesting ways for people to improve their happiness?
Well, evidence, it's so important because it tells us the efficacy of certain positive psychology interventions. And I think the great thing about that is some studies have a small effect size, meaning, say, gratitude. It's not necessarily going to change your life overnight or perform some big miracle, and it's not going to fix your life. But I think emphasizing the research really gives us realistic expectations. You see a lot of things on the internet saying like, do X or Y and it's going to change your life. Or I find a lot of news sites will just like grasp onto the final conclusion of the study and say, hey, if you do this, it's going to change their life. No, these things will likely not change your life overnight, but there's some great benefits to them. And I think it's important to be aware of that. For example, there was like a study in 2020, Craig and Chevens, they did a kind of a meta-analysis looking at the effects of gratitude on removing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I kind of just looked at a large selection of studies from the past couple decades on gratitude. So some examples of gratitude interventions are writing down 3 things that are good happening in your life, or writing a gratitude letter to somebody and delivering that letter. And they wanted to see what is the actual effect of this after looking at all the studies done recently. And they actually found it had a small if any effect on removing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I think it's important to know the scope of what gratitude or these other things can do. Gratitude, it's not going to change your life, but it can do some amazing things like improve your social relationships, help you cope with a difficult adverse life event, or improve your positive well-being. But I think it's important to know that gratitude isn't necessarily going to remove, say, symptoms of depression and anxiety. So that's why I love the research. It kind of points us to know what these things can do for us in a realistic way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that a lot of people are quick to give advice, but not necessarily an expert in certain things, right? And I think that a way that we can become experts in areas are through research and learning and studying and practicing and credentialing and all of that stuff. And yeah, being able to have some facts to back up the advice or the suggestions that you're giving people, I think is really important, and especially in mental health. So, and I was listening to your podcast, and you had one that talked all about joy and broke down a lot of different examples of research, and I really liked it. I thought it was awesome. So let's just, for our audience's sake, define joy for us.
So overall,
or from a scientific perspective.
Overall, what the research has shown that joy is an emotion. There's been a lot of theory building lately. It's all qualitative research. Scientists and researchers can't just crunch numbers and be like, aha, this is what joy is. So it's a little more tricky than that. But overall, a lot of the past studies have defined joy as an emotion. We all kind of know what joy feels like, but what is an emotion then? An emotion has two parts, well, multiple parts, but on the most basic level, joy and an emotion, it's first our perception of something. So how do we perceive something, and then how do we respond to that said thing? In the most simplest language, joy is a response to something we perceive as good. So a more realistic, real world example is if we're walking down the street and we happen to see a group of dogs, we might perceive that as something good that we like and respond with joy. But again, the definition changes from person to person. Mm-hmm. Somebody might perceive that group of dogs as neutral or perhaps negative. But that's the great thing about joy, is we all perceive things differently, all have different things we find as joyful. And the research also shows that some people have a more joyful disposition. So some people are just more apt to perceiving joy in things. They have a lower threshold to perceiving joy, find joy in more things. But joy is one of the most understudied things in positive psychology, emotions. So they're still trying to figure out why some people are more joyful than others. But we all kind of know what joy feels like, but for research purposes, what has science said joy feels like? Joy can come along with a lot of feelings of freedom, ease, etc. Different for everyone, but there may be changes in our visual perception. Physical movements may feel freer, easier when we're joyful. Smiling happens involuntarily. We also have changes in cognition and thinking when we're joyful. If we're feeling joyful, we're probably not being chased by a lion or a tiger in the woods. So we're allowed to feel free, and just it broadens our thinking when we're joyful. And we just feel more in touch with reality and ourselves when joyful.
I like how you say broadening our thinking, because I believe that too. I believe that, well, and science backs this up, you know, when we are calm and happy, our higher level thinking parts of our brains are open and activated, and we retain information better, we learn better, we make more positive connections with other people when we're happy and calm. And yeah, so I think that's cool that you mentioned that there's higher levels of thinking and better thinking capabilities when you're happy too. So what do you have any suggestions or tools that you would make or suggest to our viewers about adding more joy into our lives? And I'll just do a little sidebar on that, because one thing that I've realized is that I think that our own definitions are very unique to us, like a lot of things. So, because I suggest a lot of self-care tools and practices to people. And what I've realized is it's just so unique based on the individual. And I'm thinking joy is kind of the same. But if you were to be able to provide just a couple of general suggestions for people to try out, what would you say?
So for some general suggestions of things that we can do to add more joy to our lives is, one, create a joy journal. In 2020, Danielle Casiopo kind of wrote an article about joy in the Journal of Positive Psychology. And one thing she mentioned was that people can keep a joy journal, just being aware of the joy in their lives and other people's lives as well. So notice where you found joy that day, that week, that month, and then where do other people find joy in their lives? So just becoming more aware of where you personally find joy, because it's going to be different for everyone. Again, like where one person finds joy, someone else might not. And that's the cool thing about joy. But then another thing we can do is savor those moments of joy. One of my favorite articles of all time is in 2013, Hurley and Kwan published this paper called Savoring Helps Most When You Have Little. And they found that those people that didn't have tons of positive events in their life happening, if they savored those moments that they did have, they were likely to be almost as happy as those that had lots of positive things happening. So when you do experience joy, really be in the moment and take in all those positive emotions, like squeeze all the joy you can out of that moment and just try and be present and sit with that joy. Don't just try to hop to the next thing happening. Just really be present and enjoy that joy. But the great thing about savoring too is you can also savor by reminiscing. So if something isn't joyful in your life right now, you can also look back to previous joyful moments and just reminisce and visualize those previous joyful moments and remember them vividly. Think of all the senses you were feeling and just sit with that joy that you did feel in the past as well.
Yeah, being able to visualize something is so powerful, isn't it? It's like this resource that we have, this tapped in tool to be able to pull ourselves physically into a different state. So I love that you suggest looking back and finding some, if you don't have anything right now, looking back and kind of diving into that moment and really, what did that moment look like? What did that moment feel like? What did it smell like? What did it taste like? Using all those five, what did it sound like? And just putting yourself there, and no one can take that away from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is there anything else that in relation to finding joy or the research behind joy that that we need to hear or that you wanted to include?
I just wanted to say, know what doesn't give you joy and know what doesn't give you happiness, because at the end of the day, we're all human. It's normal to feel negative emotions sometimes, to feel angry, upset. And if you're looking into positive psychology, it's not about feeling happy all the time. We're all human again. So just know it doesn't give you joy and happiness. Some studies show that actually suppressing negative emotions might actually make them more prominent, and it doesn't necessarily make them go away. So maybe think of your negative emotions as a check engine light. Like, look into that. Don't try and ignore all your negative emotions in an effort to be happy, because that's just unrealistic.
I see. Okay, so kind of just accepting things for where they're at, getting clear on what you don't like, and that will help you to get more clear on what you do like.
Exactly.
Get that right?
True. Yeah. Positive psychology is not about trying to be positive 100% of the time. So,
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for clearing that up because I think that might be a misconception.
yeah. And I think it's so important to that I mention that in when I'm talking to people about positive psych.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I always ask on the show about self-care. So, what would be your top self-care tip?
I would say find an active leisure hobby. Um, Leisure, it's time away from your responsibilities, etc. Things you personally choose autonomously to do in your free time. But active leisure, it's something that's a little more absorbing, requiring a little more effort. So, like physically active leisure, like hiking, walking, sports, socializing, mental leisure, like painting, reading, etc. And there was actually a study in 2020 by Hu and colleagues, and they found that they kind of got a group to do active leisure of their choice for 30 minutes a day, every day for a week. And those people at the end of that week were had higher life satisfaction and more positive emotions experienced in comparison to the control group. And it just kind of goes to show how important it is to take the time for yourself and find things that you want to do. And the great thing about active leisure is what you want to do is going to be completely different than, say, somebody else. So just finding that hobby or leisure time or leisurely activity that you personally really enjoy. It might be easy to just sit at home and watch Netflix to detach and relax from work, which is great sometimes. But if you can find another activity to add in there, then you can also be fulfilling a lot of psychological needs as well, like meaning, purpose, mastery, etc.
So, instead of doing leisurely things, you're suggesting you'd be taking care of yourself better if you did active leisure.
Yeah, like things that just require a little more effort, but they're still very enjoyable, absorbing. You
Oh.
might experience flow during those activities, um, and you might also experience joy in those activities as well.
So, what could be some examples? So, like going for a nice scenic walk or,
Yeah, it's different for everyone. So it could be just like talking to a friend on the phone, going for a hike, going for a walk, reading a book, rock climbing, snowboarding, whatever the person enjoys.
oh, I see what you mean. Okay. I was thinking that you meant like actually doing something physical, but you mean like just cognitively participating in something as opposed to kind of checking out leisurely.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That's clear to me now. I got that. Like just being in the moment, doing something that requires you to not be like numbed out or checked out.
Exactly.
And then what would be the benefits of that?
Um, so there was a study that kind of compared, say, like passive leisure, like watching TV versus active leisure. So like physically, socially, or mentally active. And they just found that the active leisure fulfilled more psychological needs like meaning, mastery, affiliation, and things like that that psychologically can be great for us.
Okay. Very cool. I love that self-care tip. That's so great. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge and expertise on the show today and taking the time to hang out with us. You guys that are watching, if you want to learn more about Trina, you can go to her website. So her website is ahappieryear.com. If you want to listen to her podcast, you can find them anywhere you listen to your podcasts. You just look up the Happycast, the science of happiness. And her Instagram is at Trina Kai, so Kai. And you can find her on Instagram. So thanks everybody for watching the show today. I hope you can go out there and prioritize some joy, maybe find some active leisure, and enjoy this nice summer month. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Trina.